I used to tell myself birthdays didn't matter anymore, that after a certain age, the candles start to feel less like celebration and more like reminders of time passing, of voices gone quiet, of promises that once filled a house now replaced by silence. This year, that silence felt heavier than usual. My name's Helen, and I live on the coast of Maine, a small house perched on the edge of the Atlantic, where the wind hums through the pine trees and gulls cry out like they're calling for something they've lost. Most days, I find comfort in the sea's rhythm, but that morning, the ocean just sounded lonely. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Anyway, the morning of my 57th birthday started like any other. Coffee in the chipped blue mug Mark gave me years ago. A slice of toast I barely finished, and a table set for one. No phone calls, no messages, not even a reminder from my kids. I tried to laugh it off. "They're busy," I said out loud, just to break the silence. My son, Evan, had just started a new job out in Chicago. My daughter, Rachel, had 2 kids under 10. Half her texts were about spilled juice and missing shoes. I understood. Life moves fast. But still, when you've spent decades being the person who remembers everyone else, it stings to realize no one's remembering you. By noon, the quiet had settled deep in my bones, the kind of quiet that makes you start talking to inanimate objects. I washed the dishes just to feel useful, humming an old song I couldn't finish because it reminded me of him, Mark. He's been gone 5 years now. Cancer came like a thief in the night and left me with a house full of echoes. Since then, I've kept things as he left them. The same photo frames, the same worn recliner by the window, the same dent in the pillow on his side of the bed. It's my way of keeping him close, even if it's just an illusion. I didn't plan to celebrate. What's there to celebrate when the people you love are too far away to notice? Still, out of habit, or maybe hope, I bought myself a cupcake from the little bakery downtown. Vanilla with lemon frosting, my favorite. I told the cashier it was for someone special. She smiled and said, "They must be lucky." I nodded and walked out before she could see the truth in my eyes. Back home, I lit a single candle, watched the flame flicker, whispered a wish I didn't really believe in. Something about feeling seen again. And just as I leaned forward to blow it out, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not hesitant, just steady. 3 short knocks. For a moment, I froze. No one ever came by unannounced. My nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. The mailman had already been by hours earlier. I glanced at the clock. 3:12 p.m. The candle's flame trembled, like it knew something I didn't. I hesitated, my heart picking up a rhythm it hadn't felt in years. Then another knock, slightly firmer this time. When I finally stood, my knees felt weak, but not from age, from something else. Anticipation, dread, maybe both. I walked slowly toward the door, every step echoing louder than it should. My hand hovered over the handle, and that's when it hit me. This might not be about being forgotten after all. Before I tell you who was standing on the other side of that door, I need you to understand something about the years that led up to it. You see, my house wasn't always this quiet. There was a time it overflowed with noise. Evan running down the hallway in mismatched socks, Rachel yelling about missing homework, Mark singing off-key while flipping pancakes on Sunday mornings. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. That's the thing about family. You never realize how loud love sounds until it goes silent. After Mark passed, everything changed in ways I couldn't name. The kids came home for the funeral, stayed a week, then life pulled them back to their worlds. I told them I was fine, that I liked the peace and quiet. Truth was, I was just afraid of being a burden, afraid of being the mother they checked on out of guilt. So I learned to keep my loneliness tidy, folded neatly between errands, grocery lists, and the occasional chat with the cashier who always asked about my day. But birthdays have a way of sneaking under your armor. They whisper old memories when you least expect it. Like that year, Mark surprised me with a road trip to Vermont. He said he wanted to show me 1,000 shades of green. We got lost 3 times, ended up in a diner where the waitress sang happy birthday with a cigarette still in her hand. I laughed until I cried. Now I cry without the laughter. As the day dragged on, the shadows in the kitchen grew longer. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. Not even one of those half-hearted, happy birthday mom texts that come between meetings. I made myself some tea, just to fill the air with the sound of something boiling. The kettle whistled, sharp and lonely. I watched the steam rise, blurring the window view. The same ocean that once looked endless now looked like it was pulling away. And then, almost without realizing, I started talking to him. "Mark, you'd laugh at me right now," I said quietly, wrapping my arms around myself, crying over a cupcake like a teenager. I could almost hear his voice, low and warm. "You always cared too much, Helen. That's your gift and your curse." He was right. I cared deeply. About everything. About everyone. Even people who'd forgotten how to care back. I sighed, leaned back in my chair, and stared at that little candle stub still sitting on the counter. The flame had gone out, but the wax was still warm, like a heartbeat fading. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. Same calm insistence. Only this time, there was a pause before the 3rd one. Like whoever stood outside was gathering courage. I stood again, slower this time, and crossed the room. My reflection in the window startled me. A woman older than she felt, still carrying the ghosts of every year she'd loved and lost. My hand reached for the doorknob. My breath caught. I didn't know then that what waited on the other side would change the meaning of birthdays for me forever. I didn't open the door right away. Something in the air told me this wasn't just a neighbor dropping by. The silence on the other side felt thick, like whoever stood there was holding their breath too. "Just a minute," I called out, my voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard in years. I wiped my eyes quickly. Funny how we still want to look presentable, even when no one's supposed to be looking, and turned the knob. The door creaked open, and the wind carried in a chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. Standing there was a young woman, maybe late 20s, early 30s, soaked from the drizzle that had started outside. Her hair clung to her face, and she held something tight against her chest, a worn, faded envelope. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound polite instead of startled. She hesitated, eyes darting from my face to the little candle on the counter behind me, still smoking from earlier. "Are you Helen?" "Yes," I said slowly. She let out a shaky breath, as if confirming something to herself. Then she smiled, a nervous, tender sort of smile. "You don't know me," she began, "but I think you knew my mother." The words hung there, suspended between us. My mind scrambled for connections. A student's parent? Someone from church? The years blurred together when you've lived enough of them. But there was something about her eyes, sad, searching, that made me step aside without thinking. "Come in, dear. You're drenched," I said. "Let me get you a towel." She nodded, still gripping the envelope like it might disappear if she let go. I led her to the kitchen and handed her a dish towel from the drawer. She took it carefully, her fingers trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain against the window and the kettle I'd forgotten to turn off, still hissing faintly behind us. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry for showing up like this. I didn't know where else to go." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt that familiar tug in my chest, the one that comes when you recognize pain, even if you don't yet know its name. "It's all right," I said gently. "Sit down. Tell me what's going on." She sat, still holding the envelope. Her eyes flicked to the framed photo on the shelf, the one of Mark and me by the lighthouse. Her voice softened. "That's him, isn't it?" I blinked, startled. "You know my husband?" She nodded slowly. "My mother kept his letters." At first, I thought I'd misheard. "Letters?" ... The room tilted slightly, like the air itself had shifted. I hadn't heard his name spoken by a stranger in years, and suddenly it was like he'd walked back into the room through her voice. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What letters?" She looked down at the envelope, then back up at me, eyes glistening. "The ones he sent to her. She passed away 2 months ago, and when I was sorting through her things, I found them. Dozens of letters from someone named Mark Holloway." My breath caught. That was my mark. Before I could form another thought, she pushed the envelope toward me. "This one, it's addressed to you." For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. My hand hovered over it like it was fragile glass. My name, written in his handwriting. Steady, looping, unmistakable. It was dated 5 days before he died. Something inside me cracked open. The girl, Lila, she told me later, looked at me with such compassion it almost hurt. She didn't know what she'd just handed me. Not really. And as I held that envelope against my chest, I realized my forgotten birthday wasn't about being forgotten at all. It was about being found in the most unexpected way possible. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, 2 women from different worlds, bound by a man we both missed in different ways. Her name was Leela Dawson, 28 years old, from upstate New York. She'd driven 4 hours to find me. "I thought about calling," she said softly, "but I didn't think I'd have the courage if I didn't come in person." The rain had softened outside, but the quiet between us felt charged. I turned the envelope over in my hands, not yet ready to open it. "You said your mother knew my husband." "How?" Lila smiled faintly, her eyes distant. "She met him through a hospice volunteer program. My mother had been sick for years, and I guess your husband, Mark, was part of the group that sent letters to patients. Just little notes of encouragement, kindness, reminders that someone out there cared." My chest tightened. That was so like him. Mark had always believed words could heal where medicine couldn't. Even when his own body was betraying him, he'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, writing letters to people he'd never meet. I never asked who they were for. I thought they were for himself, to make sense of his pain. But now, hearing it from her, it was like finding out he'd been quietly saving lives while his own slipped away. "My mother said his letters kept her going," Leela continued. "She said he wrote like he understood pain, not just felt it, but transformed it. When she got too weak to write back, she'd dictate and I'd send them for her. That's how I knew his name." I felt the tears before I could stop them. "He never told me," I whispered. She shook her head softly. "Maybe he didn't want you to carry more grief than you already had." We both sat there, 2 strangers connected by a thread of kindness neither of us had expected. Then she looked at me, her expression shifting. "When I was going through her things, I found one letter she never mailed. It was from your husband, written to you. The last one." Her voice trembled. "I thought you should have it." I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing over the flap of the envelope. It felt heavier than paper, like it carried years of silence, waiting to be broken. Lila reached out, gently touching my wrist. "He mentioned you in his letters, you know. Said you had the kind of strength that scared him sometimes, that even when he couldn't speak, he felt your love like light through the window." Her words undid me. All the walls I'd built to survive without him began to crumble. I opened the envelope slowly, my hands shaking. The paper inside was thin and slightly yellowed, but the ink was bold, his handwriting firm. "My dearest Helen," it began. I didn't read it all aloud, not yet. Some words belonged to the quiet, but a few lines slipped out through trembling lips. "If you're reading this, it means I'm finally where the pain can't reach me. Don't let grief turn you into stone. Promise me you'll open the door when love comes knocking, even if it's not in the form you expect." My breath hitched. He couldn't have known that 5 years later, on the birthday I thought everyone forgot, love would literally come knocking. Leela wiped her eyes, and I reached for her hand without thinking. Her fingers were cold, small, but there was something steady in her grip, like two broken pieces recognizing each other. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. That night, long after she left, I sat by the window, reading and rereading his words until the ink blurred. Every sentence was a heartbeat. Every pause a reminder. Love doesn't end. It just changes shape. And as I folded the letter back into its envelope, I realized my birthday hadn't been forgotten. It had been rewritten. I waited until morning to read it again. The rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The gulls were louder than usual, swooping over the gray waves, and for the first time in years, I woke with a strange kind of calm. The envelope sat on my nightstand, edges soft from how many times I'd picked it up and set it down again. I made coffee, opened all the curtains, and sat in the armchair by the window. Mark's old chair, the one that still held the faint scent of cedar and aftershave. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. "My dearest Helen," it began again. "If you're reading this, I suppose the tide has already gone out for me. But don't mourn the sea, my love. Be the shore that remains." I couldn't breathe for a moment. His words weren't written like a goodbye. They felt like an anchor, something meant to hold me steady when grief tried to drag me under. He wrote about the things we never said out loud, about how sorry he was for leaving too soon, about how he feared what the silence would do to me after he was gone. "Promise me," he wrote, "that you won't live like a ghost in our home, that you'll keep the door open. Love has a way of finding its way back, even if it changes faces." I could almost hear him chuckle softly as I read it, his voice in my ear, teasing but warm. "You are always too proud to ask for help, Helen. Don't let that be your downfall." By the time I reached the last line, my tears had dried into something gentler, like gratitude. It read, "And when you think I've forgotten you, look for the knock. You'll know it when you hear it." I sat back, stunned. A knock. That was what started it all. The sound at the door that I'd thought was coincidence. But now it didn't feel random at all. I pressed the letter to my chest and looked around the room that had once felt like a mausoleum. It was suddenly alive again. Every photo, every shadow, every breath of salt air felt like his way of saying, I never really left. Later that afternoon, Lila came back. She'd stayed in town overnight, unsure if she should disturb me again. But she said she felt pulled to check on me. I smiled when I saw her car pull into the drive. "Come in," I said before she could even knock. "You might as well make this your second home." She laughed softly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time. We sat at the table, and I poured us both coffee. She asked if I'd read the letter, I did, I said quietly. It was like hearing his voice again. What did he say? She asked gently. I hesitated. He told me to open the door when love comes knocking. Her eyes filled with something between wonder and sorrow. Maybe that's why I came. There was silence then, but a warm one. The kind that fills rather than empties. She told me more about her mother, about the illness that stole her piece by piece, about how Mark's words gave her mother courage to keep fighting. He told her, Lila said, voice trembling, that people aren't meant to disappear quietly. That even when our bodies give out, love still travels. That sounded exactly like him. I felt something shift in me, like a window had opened. All this time, I'd been living like grief was a wall. But what if it was a doorway instead? I looked at Lila, this young woman who'd shown up at my doorstep on the loneliest day of my life, and realized she wasn't here by accident. Maybe she was the knock he'd meant. Would you like to stay for dinner? I asked her. She blinked, surprised. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, I said, with a small smile. It's an invitation. She stayed, and as we cooked together, her chopping vegetables, me fussing over the sauce like my mother used to, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Company, life, hope. When she left that night, she hugged me at the door. It was brief, but real. And when she pulled away, she said, "You remind me of her. My mom, strong, kind, and a little bit stubborn." I laughed. You don't know how right you are. After she drove off, I whispered into the night, "You did it, Mark. You found a way to bring love back to my door." And for the first time since he died, I slept without the light on. The days that followed moved differently. It's funny how quickly habits of isolation dissolve when someone simply shows up and cares. Leela and I started meeting every few days for tea or a walk by the water, or just to talk about nothing and everything. At first, I thought I was helping her. She was grieving too, her mother's absence still raw and recent. But over time, I realized she was helping me just as much. One afternoon, we sat on the porch, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The sky was a hazy blue, and the sea smelled sharp with salt. "You know," she said, "I think your husband understood something most people don't." "What's that?" "That love doesn't vanish when someone dies. It just moves to a new address." I smiled. That sounds like something he'd write. She nodded. He wrote that exact sentence once, in one of his letters to Mom. We both laughed softly, though my eyes burned. The truth was, the more I learned about Mark's letters, the more I began to see my grief differently. I used to think losing him meant losing the best part of myself. But maybe what he left behind was meant to wake that part back up. It was Lila who nudged me to call my kids. "You talk about them like they're 1,000 miles away," she said one day. "But they're still your people. Maybe they just don't know how to reach you anymore." She was right. I'd spent years building walls of quiet and then wondering why no one could find the door. That evening, I picked up the phone. My heart raced like I was 16 again, calling my crush for the first time. When Evan answered, his voice was startled. "Mom, everything okay?" "Yes," I said, trying not to cry. "I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause, then, softer, "I've missed you." Rachel called the next morning, apologizing for forgetting my birthday. She said she'd been planning to visit soon, but didn't want to surprise me unannounced. I told her, surprises aren't always bad. Over the next week, both of them made plans to come home. Just for a weekend, they said. But that was enough. I told Lila about it as we walked through town. She smiled. "Looks like the universe is working overtime for you." "Maybe," I said, glancing at her. "Or maybe your knock woke it up." She laughed. "I'll take that." Before we parted ways that evening, she looked at me earnestly. "Helen, I want you to know something. My mom used to say her greatest fear was that she'd leave me alone, but I don't feel alone anymore. Meeting you, it feels like part of her found its way back." Those words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd once cried over a cupcake, and wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to life, to say thank you, because sometimes love doesn't return the way you expect. It arrives wearing a different face, a different name, a different need, but it's love all the same. And I finally understood what Mark meant. It was never about waiting for people to remember me. It was about remembering how to open the door. The week my children came home, it felt like the world shifted back into color. I'd spent years telling myself they were too busy to visit, that I didn't want to bother them. But the truth was, I'd stopped inviting life in. I had been the one closing the door. That Friday afternoon, the gravel crunched under Evan's rental car tires, and I nearly dropped the dish towel in my hands. I watched from the window as he stepped out, taller and broader than I remembered, his face older but still carrying that same boyish hesitation. Rachel arrived soon after, pulling into the driveway with her kids in tow, their laughter spilling out before the car even stopped. For a moment, I stood frozen at the doorway. So many years of silence, waiting, regret, all of it tangled together in my chest. Then Evan looked up, saw me, and smiled. "Hey, Mom." That was all it took. I went straight into his arms and held on. The smell of his cologne, the weight of his shoulders. It all felt like coming home to something I'd forgotten I'd lost. Rachel joined us, her eyes already glistening. "We're sorry," she said, her voice breaking, "for missing so many things, for missing you." I shook my head. "No, life happens. I'm just glad you're here now." We spent the evening cooking together, laughter filling the kitchen again. The kids helped set the table, fussing over where to place napkins and spoons, while I made the sauce just the way Mark used to. Too much garlic, not enough patience. As the smell filled the house, I caught myself humming under my breath. The tune was an old one, something Mark used to whistle while fixing the fence out back. Lila arrived just before sunset, bringing a pie she'd baked that morning. She looked shy at first, unsure if she belonged, but Rachel welcomed her immediately, asking about her drive, complimenting her hair. Within minutes, she fit right in, like she'd always been part of our story. We ate until we were full, talking and laughing, and for the first time in years, the walls seemed to exhale. The house didn't echo anymore. It lived. After dinner, I brought out a small cake, white frosting, strawberries on top. "Don't tell me it's still your birthday," Rachel teased. "No," I smiled. "Just a celebration for everything we almost lost and somehow found again." We lit the candles together, all of us leaning close, the flame flickering in our reflections. I didn't make a wish this time. I didn't need to. When I blew them out, I felt something settle. Peace, maybe. Gratitude, definitely. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch with Leela. The air was cool, the ocean calm. "You look lighter," she said softly. "I feel lighter," I admitted. It's strange. Sometimes healing doesn't come from the people who broke your heart, or the ones who left. It comes from the strangers who arrive when you least expect them. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "I'm glad I came knocking." I looked at her, truly looked, and felt that same warmth I'd once felt with Mark. A recognition, not of romance, but of purpose. "You did more than knock, Leela," I said. "You brought life back into this house." She looked down, twisting her fingers nervously. "There's something I haven't told you yet," she said. Something I'd been waiting for the right moment to share. My heart skipped, sensing the weight in her voice. What is it? Her eyes lifted to mine, bright and earnest. It's about your husband. I thought I'd learned everything there was to know about Mark. But what Lila told me that night showed me that love doesn't end with goodbye. It continues its work long after we're gone. When my mother passed, she began, I didn't just find the letters. I found the foundation paperwork for a small community project she'd started. Something your husband inspired. I frowned gently. What kind of project? She wanted to build a support network for widows and caregivers. People who'd lost their anchor, but still had to keep sailing somehow. She called it the Second Shore. The name alone hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. She said it came from something he wrote. Leela continued, when the tide takes what you love, wait for the second shore. There's always another place where life begins again. I covered my mouth with my hand. That sounded exactly like him. She never got to finish it, Lila said, but I decided to, and I want to name it after him. The Holloway Foundation for Healing Hearts. Tears blurred my vision before I even realized I was crying. Lila, she shook her head quickly. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted your blessing. I didn't want to use his name without it. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. You don't need my permission. You already have his spirit. That's what matters. Her lips trembled, then curved into a smile. Thank you. We sat there for a long while. The sound of the waves beneath the silence. Every crash against the rocks felt like a heartbeat echoing through time. For years, I'd believed that grief was something you carry forever. But sitting there with her, this young woman my husband had unknowingly left behind for me to find, I realized something profound. Grief doesn't fade by forgetting. It heals by transforming, by finding new hands to hold, new hearts to care for, new reasons to keep going. And next morning, my family gathered around the breakfast table before leaving. The kids promised to visit again soon. And for once, I believed them. There was no guilt in their voices this time, just warmth. When Lila got ready to go, she hugged me tightly. I'll send you updates, she said. I want you to be part of this too. I'd like that, I said, smiling through tears. Maybe I could help, write letters, like Mark used to. Her eyes lit up. That would be perfect. And just like that, the world that had felt so small, so silent, started to open again. After they all left, I stood on the porch, watching the road disappear into the horizon. The house behind me hummed with memory and light. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that had once felt useless, idle, forgotten, and realized they were still capable of building, of loving, of creating meaning. That night, before bed, I took out Mark's letter once more. I read it one last time, then placed it back in the drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Promise me you'll open the door when love comes knocking, he'd written. I smiled. I did, Mark. I did. I turned off the light, letting the moon spill across the floorboards. The ocean whispered beyond the glass, endless and forgiving. And as I closed my eyes, I thought about everything that had changed, all because of a knock, an envelope, and the courage to open the door again. Love had come back, just not in the form I expected. Because sometimes, love returns not to rekindle what was lost, but to remind you that you were never truly alone. Her story reminds us that strength isn't loud, it's what survives when everything else breaks.